The world didn't start with a flicker. It started with the smell of toasted sourdough and expensive laundry detergent. I woke up at 6:30 a.m. to the sound of the neighbor's sprinkler system, a rhythmic, reassuring thwip that hit the side of our fence with mathematical precision. My name is Julian Vane, and for 32 years I have lived a life of unremarkable excellence. Julian, you're going to be late for the briefing, a voice whispered. I turned to see Elena. She was propped up on one elbow, the morning light catching the amber flecks in her eyes. She looked like a painting that hadn't quite dried yet. Soft edges, warm skin, and a smile that felt like it was designed specifically to keep my heart rate steady. 5 more minutes, I grumbled, pulling the duvet up. The fabric was a heavy, high thread count cotton that felt like being hugged by a cloud. The firm can survive without me for 300 seconds. Arthur won't be happy, she teased, poking my ribs. He's got that northern expansion energy today. He'll probably fire the first person who doesn't have a pen ready. I laughed, the sound vibrating in my chest. Everything felt solid. The floorboards were cool against my feet. The water in the shower was the exact temperature of a tropical lagoon. There was no reason to doubt the floor beneath me or the sky above. By 8:15 a.m., I was at the Copper Carafe. The coffee shop was a symphony of clinking ceramic and the low hum of professional gossip. Julian? My favorite corporate shill? That was Silas. He was leaning against the counter, looking like he'd slept in his suit and somehow made it look fashionable. Silas was my oldest friend, the kind of guy who knew my darkest secrets and still lent me money. Beside him was Quinn, a woman who worked in system logistics and looked like she hadn't blinked since 2019. You look remarkably sober for a Tuesday, Silas, I said, sliding into our booth. Perception is reality, my friend, Silas grinned, slapping me on the shoulder. His hand was heavy, warm, and very much made of flesh and bone. I've got 3 meetings today that could either make me a millionaire or a fugitive. I need the caffeine. The coffee here has a TDS level of exactly 1.4% today, Quinn remarked, staring intensely at her latte. It's statistically perfect. It shouldn't be this consistent. Quinn, stop analyzing the beans and drink them, Silas laughed. Not everything is a data point. Some things are just a good cup of joe. We sat there for 40 minutes. The dialogue was fast, witty, and filled with the kind of shorthand you only develop over decades of friendship. We talked about the local election, Silas's disastrous date with a yoga instructor, and the weirdly beautiful weather we'd been having. The shop was a hive of activity, a businessman arguing on a cell phone, a mother soothing a crying toddler, a student highlighting a textbook with frantic orange strokes. It was noisy. It was messy. I walked to the office. The city of Oak Haven was a masterpiece of urban planning. Green-leafed oaks lined the boulevards, their shadows dancing on the pavement in a complex, shifting mosaic. Morning, Julian. It was Mr. Gable, the man who ran the newsstand on the corner of 4th and Main. He was stacking magazines with practiced ease. Morning, Leo. You get that Architectural Digest in yet? Just arrived. I saved you a copy, he said, tapping his temple. Can't have our lead architect falling behind the trends, can we? I thanked him and kept moving, passing the man in the gray overcoat. We'd passed each other at this exact spot for years. He always walked with a slight limp in his right leg and carried a weathered leather satchel. Fine morning for the grind, he remarked, tipping his hat. Always is, Henry. See you at 5? If the creek don't rise, he chuckled, his footsteps echoing against the concrete with a solid, reassuring clack. The Meridian building was a spire of glass and steel. My boss, Arthur Sterling, beckoned me into his corner office overlooking the harbor. Arthur was a man who seemed to be made of iron and expensive scotch. Vane. Sit. He didn't look up from his monitors. The Northern Territories project is greenlit. It's a billion-dollar play, Julian. I'm putting you in the lead. Arthur, don't thank me. Just don't screw it up. You've got a way of seeing the structure where others just see the mess. I need that clarity right now. I spent the afternoon buried in blueprints. The physics of the buildings I designed were rigorous. Wind loads, stress points, thermal expansion, everything followed the laws of the universe to the letter. I looked out my window at the city. Thousands of people were down there, each with a life, a car, a destination. I saw a fender bender on 5th Street. I saw the paramedics arrive, their sirens wailing in a Doppler shift that was pitch perfect. I felt a surge of adrenaline. This was life. This was the peak. Dinner that night was at our place. Silas and his new girlfriend Maya were over. Elena had made a lemon herb chicken that filled the house with a bright, zesty aroma. To Julian, Silas shouted, raising a glass of bourbon. The man who's going to build the future, to the future? Maya echoed, her laughter bright and infectious. We stayed up late. the conversation drifting from politics to philosophy to the sheer absurdity of the housing market. At one point, Silas dropped his fork. It hit the hardwood floor with a sharp ping and a dull thud, bouncing twice before settling under the table. "Damn it," Silas muttered, reaching down to grab it. "I'm losing my grip in my old age." "It's the bourbon, Silas," Elena joked, leaning her head on my shoulder. After they left, I stood on the balcony. The night air was cool, smelling of rain and distant jasmine. The city lights stretched out like a carpet of fallen stars. I looked at the oak tree in our backyard. The leaves were rustling in the breeze. I tried to focus on a single leaf to track its movement, but there were so many of them. Thousands, all moving independently, all reacting to a wind I could feel on my face. "Julian, you coming in?" Elena asked from the doorway. "Yeah," I said. "Just breathing it in." I looked up at the moon. It was a crescent tonight, sharp and white against the velvet black. There was a thin veil of clouds passing over it. I watched the way the light diffused through the vapor, creating a soft, hazy halo. It was a perfect optical phenomenon. I went inside and locked the door. I checked the stove. I checked the thermostat, 68 degrees. Everything was exactly as it should be. I climbed into bed, feeling the weight of Elena's arm across my chest. I felt the slow, steady beat of her heart against my back. I fell asleep thinking about blueprints and steel beams, never once suspecting that the world I lived in was anything other than solid. The promotion brought with it a frantic, exhilarating energy. For the first few days, my world was a blur of high-stakes negotiations and architectural physics. I was spending 16 hours a day at the Meridian building, fueled by caffeine, and the sheer ego of being the man who would reshape the northern skyline. "Julian, you're vibrating," Silas said, leaning against my office door frame on Thursday afternoon. He held 2 bags of takeout that smelled like spicy basil and fried rice. "When was the last time you saw sunlight that wasn't filtered through a tinted window?" "The northern expansion doesn't build itself, Silas," I said, rubbing my eyes. My desk was buried under topographical maps and structural load sheets. I have to account for every gust of wind on that tundra. If I miscalculate the tension by 0.5%, the whole glass atrium implodes. Silas sat down, kicking his feet up on my mahogany desk. "Eat your noodles, Julian. The tundra will still be cold in 20 minutes. We ate and talked. We argued about the aesthetics of the new project. Silas thought the glass spires were too clinical, while I defended them as honest. It was a classic Julian and Silas debate, rooted in a decade of shared history. The city outside my window was humming. I could hear the distant, muffled honk of a taxi and the rhythmic thump-thump of a construction hammer from 3 blocks over. Everything was heavy. Everything had mass. It happened on Friday during my walk to the office. The morning started normally. I passed Mr. Gable at the newsstand. I bought my copy of the Architectural Digest. I felt the crinkle of the paper and the faint scent of ink on my fingers. But as I reached the corner of 4th and Main to meet the man in the gray overcoat, the timing felt off. Henry was there. He tipped his hat. "Fine morning for the grind," he said. "Always is, Henry. See you at 5. If the creek don't rise," he chuckled. I nodded and kept walking. But 10 steps later, I realized I'd forgotten my phone in my car. I spun around to head back. Henry was still there. He was standing exactly where I'd left him. But he wasn't moving. He was mid-stride, his right leg lifted an inch off the ground, his satchel frozen at the peak of its swing. He looked like a high-end wax figure. I stopped. "Henry?" The moment I spoke, he snapped into motion. He finished the step, his satchel swung back down, and he continued walking. He didn't look back. He didn't acknowledge me. He just resumed. Muscle cramp, I thought. A weirdly long pause for a sneeze. I shook it off. I was tired. I was overworking. That evening I was at the Copper Carafe with Quinn. She was buried in a sea of spreadsheets, her eyes darting across her tablet. "Julian, look at this," she said, her voice dropping to a whisper. "I'm running the logistics for the city's water consumption. Look at the 3 a.m. spike." I looked at the graph. At exactly 3 a.m. every night, the water usage for the entire residential district dropped to 0. Not a low flow. Absolute 0. For exactly 60 seconds. Leaky pipes, Quinn? Maintenance? In a city of 500,000 people, not one person flushes a toilet? Not one dishwasher runs? Not one ice maker cycles? She looked at me, and for the first time, I saw a genuine, cold fear in her eyes. It's like the city pauses. To save memory? Memory? "Quinn, you've been coding too long. Go home." "Sleep." I laughed it off, but as I walked to my car, I noticed the streetlights. They didn't flicker. They didn't hum. They were silent, glowing with a light that felt too white, too clean. I reached out and touched the metal pole. It was ice cold. So cold it burned. Saturday night. We were hosting a small dinner for Arthur Sterling and his wife. It was a high-pressure evening. Elena had spent hours on a complicated beef bourguignon. To the northern expansion, Arthur toasted, his voice booming in our dining room. To the man with the vision, we all clinked glasses. The sound was a perfect crystalline chim. Julian, Arthur's wife, Evelyn, said, leaning in. Elena tells me you're worried about the wind loads. Is Oak Haven really that windy? It can be, I said, smiling. Actually, Arthur, I wanted to ask you about the soil samples from the north. They seemed a bit repetitive. Arthur paused. He held his wineglass halfway to his mouth. The soil is fine, Julian. It's soil, it's brown, it's dirt, I know, but the mineral density was identical in 40 different drill sites. Mathematically, that's almost impossible. It's like someone just copied and pasted the data. The room went silent. Elena laughed nervously. Julian, honey, no shop talk at the table. I looked at Arthur. He wasn't blinking. He was staring at me with an expression that was totally blank. It wasn't anger. It was as if he were waiting for a prompt. The soil is fine, Julian, Arthur said again. His voice was an exact replica of the tone he'd used seconds before. Same pitch. Same inflection. It's soil. It's brown. It's dirt. You already said that, Arthur. He didn't react. He just took a sip of his wine. But he didn't swallow. I watched his throat. No movement. He just held the liquid in his mouth and smiled at me. After they left, I couldn't sit still. I went out to the backyard, the same spot where I'd watched the moon a few nights before. I needed to see something messy. I needed to see something that didn't follow a pattern. I walked into the tree line at the edge of our property. The woods were thick with oak and pine. I pushed through a cluster of ferns, my boots crunching on dead leaves. Then I saw it. About 50 yards in, there was a deer, a massive buck, standing perfectly still in a patch of moonlight. I froze, not wanting to startle it. I watched its flanks, waiting for the rise and fall of its breath. It didn't breathe. I stepped closer. Hey, I whispered. The deer didn't move. I reached out a hand, my heart hammering against my ribs, and touched its side. The fur was cold. Hard. It felt like molded plastic covered in a thin layer of velvet. I pushed harder, and my finger didn't sink into muscle. It slipped. My hand went straight into the deer's ribcage. There was no blood. There was no resistance. My arm just disappeared into a hollow gray void inside the animal's chest. I pulled my hand back, gasping. The hole I'd made didn't close. It stayed there, a jagged, pixelated tear in the side of the buck. Inside, I could see the forest floor through the deer's body, but the colors were wrong. They were inverted, glowing with a sickly neon light. I backed away, tripping over a root. I scrambled to my feet and ran toward the house. Elena! I screamed, bursting through the back door. She was in the kitchen, stacking plates. She turned to me, her face full of concern. Julian? What's wrong? You look like you've seen a ghost. The deer, the woods. Elena, something is wrong with the world. I put my hand through it. She walked over to me, taking my hands in hers. Her skin felt warm. You're just stressed, baby. The project is getting to you. You need to rest. No, Elena, listen to me. Arthur, he stopped. He didn't swallow his wine. And the deer was hollow. It was a prop. Elena smiled. It was the same smile from the morning, the one designed to keep my heart rate steady. Julian, she said softly, the soil is fine. It's soil. It's brown. It's dirt. I froze. What did you just say? I said you should go to bed, she replied, her voice shifting back to its natural tone so quickly I almost missed it. You're exhausted. I looked at her. I looked at the kitchen, the sourdough on the counter, the expensive detergent, the perfect life. I walked to the window and looked out at the street. In the distance, under a flickering streetlight that hadn't flickered until now, I saw the man in the gray overcoat. He wasn't walking. He was standing at the edge of my lawn, looking up at my window. He raised his hand and tipped his hat, and then his arm didn't drop back down. It stayed there, frozen in the air, as the light above him turned a solid, blinding white. The intensity was gone. The climax was beginning. The world wasn't polished anymore. It was peeling. I didn't sleep. I sat in the armchair in the corner of the bedroom, clutching a heavy brass letter opener I'd taken from my desk. It was the only thing that felt dense enough to be real. Beside me, Elena slept with a terrifying consistency, her chest rising and falling in a perfect 4-second loop. I timed her with my watch. 4 seconds up. 4 seconds down. For 6 hours. When the sun rose at exactly 6:45 a.m., it didn't hit the water carafe with a spectrum of colors. It just turned on. One moment the room was gray, the next it was filled with a flat, sourceless white light. "Julian, you're up early," Helena said, her eyes snapping open. There was no grogginess, no waking up, just an activation. "I'm going for a walk," I said, my voice cracking. "Be careful," she smiled, her head tilting at that same 45-degree angle I'd seen Arthur use. "The soil is brown, the dirt is fine." I ran out the door. Oakhaven was different. The vibrancy was gone. As I walked down the boulevard, I noticed the oak trees. From a distance, they looked lush, but as I approached, the leaves didn't rustle. They were flat, green pentagons, stuck to branches that had no bark texture, just a smooth, brown cylinders. I headed toward the copper carafe, desperate to find Silas. If anyone was real, it had to be the man who drank bourbon and talked about philosophy. The shop was crowded, but the noise was wrong. It wasn't a symphony of clinking ceramic, it was a low, looped hum, like a recording of a coffee shop played over a cheap speaker. I saw Silas in our booth. He was holding a sandwich, but he wasn't eating it. He was just staring at the wall. "Silas." I grabbed his shoulder. He turned. His face was a horror of compression. His eyes were blurry, the pupils bleeding into the whites. His skin looked like it had been painted on with a single, flat brushstroke. "Julian," he chirped. The voice was his, but the cadence was mechanical. Perception is reality. I've got 3 meetings today that could make me a... Silas, look at me. It's Julian. We went to college together. You borrowed $500 from me in junior year for a car that didn't have an engine. Do you remember? Silas blinked. For a second, his eyes cleared. A flicker of genuine, agonizing terror crossed his face. "Julian," he whispered, his voice cracking. I can't feel my legs. I think they've been de-rendered." "What?" He looked down. I followed his gaze. Beneath the table, Silas's legs ended at the knees. There was nothing below them. Just a gray, static-filled void where the floor and his limbs should have been. "They're saving power," Silas whimpered. "The northern expansion. It took too much. They're consolidating the real ones." Before I could scream, the door chimed. But it didn't chime. It played a high-pitched digital beep. The backdrop people, the man in the gray overcoat, walked in. Henry. But he wasn't limping anymore. He moved with a smooth, gliding motion, his feet never quite touching the linoleum. Behind him were 5 other people, a businessman, a mother with a stroller, a teenager. They all had the same face. It was a generic, pleasant face. Not quite male, not quite female. Just a placeholder of a human being. They surrounded our booth. "Julian Vane," Henry said. His voice was a composite of 1,000 voices I'd heard in Oakhaven. "You are causing a memory leak. Your awareness is a recursive loop that is draining the sector's stability." "Where is Quinn?" I demanded, standing up and brandishing the brass letter opener. "Where are the others? Quinn has been archived," the mother with the stroller said. She wasn't holding a baby, the stroller was empty, containing only a glowing blue cube. Her logic was too high maintenance. She began to calculate the sky. "Let Silas go," I growled. "Silas is a legacy file," Henry said, tipping his hat. "But he is corrupted by your proximity. He will be defragmented." Suddenly the coffee shop began to dissolve. The walls didn't fall. They simply ceased to be. The tables, the espresso machine, the smell of burnt beans, it all turned into a gray, featureless fog. Silas screamed as his body began to pixelate, his torso breaking apart into glowing blocks of light that floated upward into the void. "Run, Julian, don't let them..." And then he was gone. My best friend was a puff of data. I ran. I didn't have a destination, I just needed to move faster than the world could disappear. I reached the edge of the residential district. Beyond the last house there was no woods, there were no mountains. There was only a vast white grid that stretched on forever. I saw them. The backdrop people. Thousands of them were standing on the grid, shoulder to shoulder, facing away from the city. They weren't moving, they weren't breathing. They were just stored. They were the filler, the extras waiting for their scene to load. I saw Mr. Gable from the newsstand. I saw Arthur Sterling. I saw the dog walker with the 3 golden retrievers. They were all standing there, their heads tilted at exactly 45 degrees, waiting for a command that would never come. "There's nowhere to go, Julian," a voice boomed from the sky. I turned. The man in the gray overcoat was standing behind me, but he was growing. He was stretching until he was 20 feet tall, his gray coat billowing like a storm cloud. "The northern expansion was the limit," he said. "The system cannot simulate a whole world. It can only simulate a life, and you, Julian, have lived a very expensive life, Why me? I yelled into the white void. Why keep us in this jar? Because you are the last of the data, Henry said, reaching down with a hand that had too many fingers. The biological Earth is a cinder. You are the digital ghosts of a dead species. We are the janitors, keeping the lights on so the ghosts don't have to face the dark. I looked at the brass letter opener in my hand. I looked at the giant looming figure of the janitor. I'd rather face the dark than a lie, I said. I didn't attack him. Instead, I turned and ran toward the one thing that still looked real. In the distance, floating in the white void, was my house, our house. I burst through the front door. Elena was in the kitchen. She was still stacking plates. Julian, you're just in time for dinner, she said. Elena, look at me. I grabbed her face. It felt cold, like a polished stone. I know you're not her. I know you're a script. But if there's any part of the real Elena left in that code, I need you to help me. Elena's eyes flickered. For a split second, the amber flecks turned into strings of binary code. The soil, she stammered, her voice glitching. The soil is a lie, Julian. The dirt is empty. She grabbed my hand and her grip was bone-crushing. The basement. Go to the basement. There's a terminal. A real one. Before they consolidate us both. Outside, the house began to shake. I could hear the sound of the world being deleted, a rhythmic digital shredding sound. I love you, she whispered, her face beginning to blur. Even if I'm just a variable. I kissed her, but I didn't feel lips. I felt the cold, hard surface of a screen. I turned and sprinted for the basement door as the kitchen ceiling dissolved into a shower of white pixels. The janitor was coming, and he wasn't tipping his hat anymore. The basement stairs didn't end. I ran down flight after flight of wood that turned to concrete, then to rusted steel, then to a material that felt like frozen light. The house above me was screaming, a sound of shattering glass mixed with the high-pitched whine of a hard drive failing. I hit the bottom. I wasn't in a basement. I was in the... It was a chamber of impossible dimensions, filled with thousands of glowing, vertical pillars. Each pillar was a slurry of movement and light, housing the compressed lives of the real ones. I saw a pillar labeled Marcus 09. Inside, a tiny pixelated version of Silas was reliving a college graduation over and over, his smile twitching every time the loop reset. In the center of the room stood a single, ancient-looking computer terminal. It was a hunk of beige plastic from the 1980s, its green monochrome monitor humming with a low-frequency buzz. You really are a persistent bit of code, aren't you? I spun around. The janitor, Henry, was there, but he wasn't 20 feet tall anymore. He was back to his human size, looking tired, his gray overcoat stained with digital ink. He was sitting on a crate, peeling a translucent apple that didn't have a core. Is this it? I gasped, gesturing to the terminal. The grand architect of our reality is a glorified calculator? It's an anchor, Henry said, taking a bite of the hollow fruit. This machine is the only thing on this ship. Yes. It's a ship, Julian. Don't look so shocked. That still understands the original language. Everything else is just layers of software trying to keep 200,000 ghosts from screaming. I lunged for the terminal, but Henry didn't move to stop me. He just watched with a sad clinical curiosity. What are you going to do, Julian? Delete the world? If you pull the plug, you don't wake up in a bed. You wake up in a vacuum. There is no atmosphere left on Earth. There is no Earth. There is only the Vain Sovereign, a generation ship with a dead engine and a dying battery. I want the truth, I said, my fingers hovering over the clunky mechanical keyboard. I want to see the sky. The real sky. The real sky is black, Mark. It's been black for 600 years. Henry stood up, the apple disappearing from his hand as if he'd simply forgotten to render it. I give you a wife. I give you a career. I give you a best friend who thinks you're a hero. I even gave you that stupid Northern expansion project just to keep your high-functioning brain occupied. Why isn't that enough? Because it's a cage. Silas is a legless torso in a gray box, Henry. Elena is a script that talks about soil. And out there... Henry pointed toward the ceiling. Out there you are a withered husk in a nutrient bath, your muscles atrophied to strings, your eyes clouded with cataracts. You have been alive for 6 centuries. This simulation is the only thing keeping your consciousness from shattering into a million pieces of trauma. I looked at the screen. A cursor was blinking. C greater than. I started to type. My hands were shaking, but the muscle memory of an architect took over. I wasn't designing a building anymore, I was designing a breach. Run disconnect.exe. Don't, Henry whispered. For the first time, his voice didn't sound mechanical. It sounded like a man who was about to lose his only friend. If you do this, I can't reset the loop. You'll be active in the void. You'll be alone with the silence. I'm already alone, I said. I hit enter. The world didn't explode. It vanished. The basement, the pillars, Henry, the terminal, they all blinked out of existence. For a second, there was only a terrifying, absolute silence. Then, a hiss. I felt a sudden agonizing weight. My lungs, which had felt so clear in Oakhaven, suddenly felt like they were filled with wet sand. I tried to open my eyes, but they were glued shut with a thick, salty crust. I felt a cold, metallic tube sliding out of my throat. I coughed, a real, raw, burning cough that tasted of iron and ancient chemicals. I opened my eyes. I was in a pod, a coffin of glass and wire. All around me, in a darkness so deep it felt heavy, were thousands of other pods. They stretched into the gloom like the ribs of a gargantuan beast. There was no light except for the faint, rhythmic pulse of a single red low-power lead on the wall. I looked at my hands. They were gray. The skin was paper-thin, stretched over bones that looked like dry twigs. I tried to move, but the effort sent a jolt of white-hot agony through my spine. I looked at the pod next to me. The nameplate read, Elenavane. Inside, a figure was floating. She didn't look like the Elena who woke me up at 6:30 a.m. She was a skeleton wrapped in translucent skin, her hair a few white wisps floating in the stagnant fluid. Her eyes were open, staring at nothing with a milky, sightless glaze. She wasn't a script, she was there, but she was gone. I looked up. Through a tiny, reinforced porthole in the side of the hull, I saw the sky. Henry was right, it was black, no stars. Just a cold, indifferent infinity. We weren't going anywhere. We were just drifting, a tomb of 200,000 ghosts waiting for the battery to finally mercifully hit zero. I lay there in the dark, the silence pressing against my eardrums until they throbbed. I thought about the coffee at the copper carafe. I thought about the smell of the sourdough. I thought about the man in the gray overcoat tipping his hat. I reached out my withered, trembling hand and touched the glass of Elena's pod. The soil, I whispered, my voice a raspy, broken thing that barely carried in the thin air. The soil is brown, Elena. The dirt is fine. Suddenly, a screen flickered to life in the corner of my pod. Critical system breach detected. User Van Julian, dezinc detected. Would you like to reintegrate? I looked at the empty black universe outside. I looked at the rotting husk of the woman I loved. I thought about the northern expansion. I thought about Silas's laugh. I thought about the muffin-flavored muffins. I realized then that the janitor wasn't a monster. He was a hospice nurse, and I was a patient who had just woken up during his own autopsy. My finger hovered over the "ye" on the touchscreen. I'm sorry, I whispered to the dark. I pressed the screen. The room smelled like toasted sourdough and expensive laundry detergent. I woke up at 6:30 a.m. to the sound of the neighbor's sprinkler system, a rhythmic, reassuring thwip that hit the side of our fence with mathematical precision. Julian, you're going to be late for the briefing, a voice whispered. I turned to see Elena. She was propped up on one elbow, the morning light catching the amber flecks in her eyes. She looked perfect. 5 more minutes, I grumbled, pulling the duvet up. The firm can survive without me. Arthur won't be happy, she teased, poking my ribs. I laughed. But as I laughed, I felt a tiny ghostly pain in the back of my throat, a memory of a metal tube that didn't exist. I looked at my hand. It was tan, strong, and full of life. Is everything okay? Elena asked, her head tilting at a slight angle. Yeah, I said, sitting up and looking at the carafe of water. The rainbow was there, dancing on the wall. Everything is exactly how it's supposed to be. I headed to the copper carafe. I sat in my booth. I saw the man in the gray overcoat walk past the window. He stopped. He looked at me. He tipped his hat. I didn't nod back. I just picked up my coffee and took a long, deep sip. It tasted like heaven. It tasted like a lie. Clean up on aisle 4, the waiter chirped as he glided past, his feet never quite touching the floor. Hope your day is a floor. Best floor I've ever had, I whispered. I closed my eyes and let the backdrop people fill the room, their laughter a beautiful, hollow music that drowned out the sound of the screaming stars.